What's going on, guys? Welcome to this special episode. Today's guest is an example of resilience, determination, and focus. She went from failing physics twice in the early stages of her engineering journey, but was able to successfully recover and apply what she learned during that time to not just earn her bachelor's degree, but also she took it all the way home and got her PhD in engineering. Today's guest is Dr. Kelsey Rodgers. She's a mechanical engineer. She got her bachelor's from Arizona State University and later on her PhD from Purdue University. She's an engineering educator, a former assistant professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and a researcher. She worked at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University as a research scholar. She currently has a YouTube channel, Engineering with Dr. Kelsey Joy, where she shares coding tutorials specifically for MATLAB. For all you MATLAB geeks who have questions, go right to her channel. She also shares career advice, resume tips and information, and other engineering fundamentals. With that being said, I'm excited to share with you our conversation where you will gain insight and learn more about the following: how she decided to pursue engineering when she was influenced heavily by her surroundings. Also, how to deal with overcoming difficult classes. She shares her experience on failing physics and overcoming the challenge to continue her journey in engineering school all the way towards a PhD. Now, the other cool thing here is that Dr. Kelsey Rodgers was an assistant professor, which means she's going to give us a lot of insight on why engineering professors are the way they are, why some classes are difficult, why some engineering professors sometimes show that they don't even care. So there's a lot of really great insight there. And not only that, she's also going to let us know how you can actually make an impact on engineering professors' teachings so that other students in the future hopefully reap better education and better styles of teaching. We also talk about women in engineering and the challenges they face, the key to succeeding in engineering school for everyone, men and women. So you want to definitely stay tuned for that. And of course, we also talk about overall her journey as a student, overcoming her challenges, and also as an engineer in academia and in industry. This conversation is going to be very insightful and encouraging for current and future engineering students who may be dealing with confusion, doubt, insecurities, struggling to find jobs, or wondering how you're going to make it through all the inevitable obstacles that engineering school is going to throw at you. So with all that being said, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to check out Dr. Kelsey Joy Rodgers' YouTube channel. Is going to be in the description, and let's jump right into it. Kelsey Rodgers, Dr. Joy, how would you like me to call you?
Kelsey's perfect.
Kelsey's perfect. Okay, got it. So thank you for being here. By the way, thank you for coming onto the channel. You're also a YouTuber up and coming.
Yes, getting started.
That's right. Yeah. So for the audience and for the new young engineers who are watching you, so the first thing I want to know actually, how did you get started with engineering? Because you're also a mechanical engineer, if I'm not mistaken.
I am a mechanical engineer, yes.
Okay.
So I was very fortunate to grow up. My uncle is an engineer. My grandpa's an engineer. I had engineers in the family. And so from a young age, I just loved math and science. And they kind of kept introducing me to different engineering things. And take your daughter to work day, my grandpa would always take me with him instead of anyone else. So my grandpa would be like, welcome to the engineering company. This is what you're going to do. Let me teach you about CAD. Let me teach you about CNCs. And I would get to do all this machining stuff from a very young age.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So then when I was in high school and I was doing really well in math and science, and I was like, well, what am I going to be? What am I going to do? That was the first thing that stood out because I was always thinking about my family and the engineers in there. So I went to engineering.
Nice. It's kind of crazy how much influence your surrounding plays on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something similar happened to me with, so when I was in Peru and then my siblings were here in the US, I told them I don't want to go to university. But eventually when I came here, I saw all my siblings going to university and I was like, okay, I guess I'll go to university. So it's so it goes right back to your surrounding and the influence that we have around you. So what kind of disciplines, you say your grandpa and your uncle were also engineers?
So my uncle is a systems engineer and my grandpa is a mechanical and electrical engineer. So he got trained in both.
That's crazy.
So he did a dual degree in mechanical and electrical. I think he did mechanical more so in undergrad and then electrical more so for a master's. Yeah. And he did a lot with computer chips. So that's where I kind of was introduced to engineering. And then at Arizona State University, I went to the Polytechnic campus, and it was really nice because our first year we just had to pick engineering, and then they did more of fundamentals, like a first year engineering is what they do a lot of nowadays. And then we had to pick civil, mechanical, or electrical. So I had a background in all three initially, and that's when I was like mechanical.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why did you go with mechanical? What did you like more about mechanical?
Okay, honestly, I was stuck between, so all three of them I love. And I was like, okay, civil, I've always loved bridges and buildings and all those different things. And then I was kind of on the fence because a lot of times, you know, it's more architectural when they do the design part. And that's something I was really interested in. And then so I had a few friends that did a lot of surveying for internships, because when you're brand new, you do a lot of surveying. So I was a little bit deterred by all this surveying, which I was okay with it. But I was like, you know, I've always been more like mechanical, electrical. I honestly was leaning towards electrical engineering. But my best friend, who was the only other girl who took mechanical engineering, and there was no women in electrical engineering, I tried to pull her over to electrical, and she was like, I'm not doing electrical with you. If you want to be in the same discipline, you have to do mechanical with me.
That's hilarious. Like, so it was like you guys, all the ladies were pulling each other. It's like, no, mechanical, no, electrical.
Yes. Yeah. And she was like, if you go electrical, if I go electrical with you, like I will never be able to design roller coasters. If you go mechanical, you could always do electrical later on in life, like for a master's or something else, because it's more generalized and you're not too like pigeonholed into just electrical. And so that was a big part of my decision, was that huge conversation between me and my best friend.
Oh, wow. So how long were you guys drinking when you were doing this, having this conversation?
We probably were. So it was like it kind of stayed over a little while. And part of it was, again, I just didn't really want to be the only girl in the program, and I didn't want her to be the only girl, and like we were each other's support system. And so
that's cool.
Like 45 guys in all of our classes and us 2 girls in all the mechanical classes. And I was like, that's already enough of a ratio. Like I don't need to face that on my own. So
yeah, I think it's getting a little more diverse. What do you think? Like there's more females nowadays, like going into STEM fields?
Yes, there's more going in. As far as being retained, there's still a big struggle there. And it really depends. Like if you look at different universities, like MIT, Harvey Mudd, they have like 50% women, which is amazing. But if you look at somewhere like Embry-Riddle, Arizona State, Purdue, like other places, not as high. And of course, MIT, Harvey Mudd, they're private schools, and you know they have different kind of funding sources and like different. But yeah, and then if you look at the retention in industry, there's a lot of women who leave. You know, even though we have a decent amount of women in undergrad, and like I think a lot of the data I've seen, at least, is a lot of women graduate in engineering. So if there's not as many women going into engineering, but the ones who are, most of the time graduate. Like we have a really high graduation rate, but then women in industry or academia, the retention rate's not that great.
What do you think that is?
I mean, if you look at some of the data or you talk to different people, like you hear their experiences, I mean, there's still some of that.
Prejudice?
Yes. It's like that's still like, this is typically like an elitist white men discipline. And I think that happens for anyone who's enters industry sometimes, like that aren't in that group. So
gotcha. Well, the conversation escalated pretty quickly.
I know.
No.
I mean, it's important, I think, to like that it's a reality, but at the same time, like there's a ton of different communities that I think help grow, like Society of Women Engineers, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, National Society of Black Engineers. Like we have, and then like out in STEM, like we have all these different organizations that I think help counter that. But I think big corporations seem to do a lot better at retaining people from different backgrounds versus.
Gotcha. No, I have a friend who she's a systems engineer. No, wait, no, she's not. I think was she biomedical? It was one of those. I think she was one of those hardcore engineering majors, and then she got a job with I think it was Northrop Grumman
Mm-hmm.
upon graduation. So she was doing very well. I think she was getting paid nicely. And then eventually, suddenly, she just left. She said, "Screw this, I'm out." So,
Mm-hmm.
and then, so my wife and her, they're good friends. And then, it's like, "Oh, what happened to Katie?" It's like, "Oh, I think what happened was that she didn't like it. She didn't enjoy it, so she just
Mm-hmm.
left. And now she's a teacher, and she likes her job and her life that much better, according to what she says. And like, she doesn't like the engineering world." And
Did she say what she didn't enjoy? Just out of curiosity.
uh, no, we didn't really go past the uh kind of like, I didn't like it, and then she likes teaching much better, and that's what she's been doing like for a long. We graduated the same year, 2012, and she's been doing teaching at least for my guess like 5, 6, 7 years, something like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, she's I mean, her husband is also an engineer, mechanical. Uh, so yeah, that's what I've seen. And then, but yeah, she went teaching.
Yeah. I think, yeah. I
So
think a lot of people still love the concept. I don't know. I think sometimes in engineering we lose sight of like the impact that we have on
mm,
society, and I think it's important to continue to emphasize that and look at it and see like, okay, when we are doing engineering work, even if we're just sitting like in an office or sitting in a lab or,
mhm.
only working with other engineers, like we still have a huge impact on society. And I think it's important to remember that, especially for people who like their passion is to help others.
Yeah,
And so you lose sight of like how you really are helping others and you're helping society grow and you're like making a huge impact on society. You can feel like what you're doing isn't important, but it is.
that's very true.
Yeah.
um there's this I think that a lot of the times when we go from the day to day, uh
Mm-hmm.
you working on the details, you're doing the paperwork, because there's a ton of paperwork. That's one of the things that you don't learn in school. But like, once you go through engineering and then you get an engineering job, there's a lot of paperwork that just has to be done. It's just
Yes.
part, it's just the nature of the beast. And so once you start doing that enough for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, okay, it's a long design process or a long development process. Nothing is going to be like done in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Um, you tend to lose sight of the big picture of like, well, why am I doing this anyway? Again, like what? So
Yeah.
I think those training sessions that I know that I've had it, I have to have those trainings like every year.
Mm-hmm.
Like they remind you, hey, if you don't do your job well, you know that if you don't get these bolts designed or procured to the specs that we need, it can cause an accident, and it has in the past. So you need to make sure that you get in the right part at the right time. And so, but yeah, you're right. It's just one of those things that people need to be reminded of the big picture and the impact that they have on society
Mm-hmm.
and the companies or the people that are actually using their products.
Yeah. And kind of another side tangent, like I think
Yeah.
it's interesting. A lot of like for me, my favorite part of my education was the projects we did. Like
Mm,
I loved all those projects. I loved my capstone. I loved all those different things we did. And like exactly like you said, like the difference between when we're in school and then we're in the real world. Like in school, it just you would get this one big problem and you would work through the whole thing in like one semester or 1 year. And you're
mm.
like, wow, look how much we accomplished. And like really all you're doing is like a prototype, where it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
rough. But in your mind, like it's just like you get to go through that whole process so quick versus in industry. Sometimes like if you are on the design side, it can be a lot slower. But then a lot of people are on the production side. And we don't really learn about that too much, like
Right.
in engineering. And then all of a sudden when you're in like the production side and you're doing the same thing and like reiterating it, and you're like, wait, I thought every engineer was just going to sit around and like think up cool stuff and design crazy things all day. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, like that'd be fun, but
Yeah, right, right. Uh yeah, that's one of the things that I try to emphasize in my channel too. I have some videos talking about, you know, you're not, so first of all, when you think of engineering and you think, oh, I'm going to be designing rockets, you don't just build a rocket on your own. That's number one.
right.
Number two, you're not going to be responsible for the entire rocket. Number three, you're going to be focusing on a little tiny part, maybe a little valve, and you're going to be helping out another engineer that's actually in charge of the valve.
Yes. Which is still
So
really cool and really fun.
Yeah, when you say to people, oh, I work for NASA, like, you know, in the in the hydraulic system, like I build valves or whatever. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying, but to somebody that's not familiar with it, oh wow, you're building rockets, when in reality you're building like a little tiny part of it. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be responsible for the rocket eventually, but that's going to be way down there.
Right. Like, it's like, that's so far out. You can't just like expect like day one when you're out, like you're like, okay, I'm going to do these like big picture, like huge things. And it's like, no, you got to work your way there.
Right.
I know you can start there and be creative and like, and there still is creativity to an extent, but it's like, yeah, it's a lot of teaming too. I know. I like that your emphasis on like all the teaming and professional skills. And it's like you need that communication and leadership and like knowing how to work with others.
Right. So you mentioned that key word there, the creativity. You mentioned also that you enjoyed civil engineering.
Yes.
That you liked it. Why did you like civil engineering? I'm curious.
A lot of it was just like the creativity, like the potential for creativity. Because I mean, I would watch like National Geographic and Discovery Channel and like different things and just traveling. And I would look at all these like incredible buildings and bridge designs. And I remember one that like stood out to me. I don't remember what it was. Like it was some giant pyramid over the ocean, like way out near India or something like that. And it was like just some like theoretical thing that they were talking about doing. And it was just like this giant building and it would be like a whole city. And I was just like, oh my goodness, could you imagine designing a whole city and this thing's based on all these alternative energies and like learning how to harness like energy from the ocean and wind and like all these things and putting it all into this one big like giant man-made city. Yeah. And I thought that seemed so cool. And then some of the reason that I was like, oh, maybe that's not for me is like reality hit of like, yes, like maybe that could be something if I went down a civil engineering track, that could be something if I got really lucky and got in the right place 60 years out, like right before retirement, you know? Yeah. And that wouldn't be something that I could do right away. And I was like, I don't know if I could see myself on a 60, 50-year track to try to get to that place in my career as a civil engineer. And so I kind of like backed off a little bit. But I did love the potential for the creativity of it. And if there's like a civil engineer that's doing that within 10 years of like being in industry, like I would love for them to tell me all about it and how they got there in 10 years. And then I'll be like, oh man, I could have done it.
I have a friend. She's a civil environmental engineer, and then actually interviewed her here on the channel too. And then she currently does. She does commercial building, and there's also housing building. I think she was telling me there's like two different types of fields, like different designs that she does. But I haven't heard her talk about bridges or anything crazy like that. I do. Have you ever heard of Santiago Calatrava?
It sounds very familiar, but I don't. I'd have
to if I'm not mistaken, Opera House, Australia.
Yes, the Sydney Opera House. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you also seen the? I think he did the Opera House, but definitely he did the Milwaukee Art Museum. Have you seen that?
I haven't been there yet, just because I just moved here. But
that's right, you're from Wisconsin.
Yeah. So I just moved here recently, so now I know I need to go there.
So the Milwaukee Art Museum has this crazy arch, and imagine whale ribs. That's kind of like his style, like signature style. That's kind of like what he does. And I was reading this book by Robert Greene, the same guy who wrote this book, and the book was called Mastery. And in the book, basically talks about how people get so good at what they do. How long they take, and he talks about this guy. Originally, he was an architecture. He was architecture, but then he was mesmerized by buildings and bridges, and he wanted to learn how to design them and build them. And so he went to school again to major in civil engineering. Wow. And so now he's an architect and civil engineer, and he does a lot of those really cool building designs around the world. That's his signature, that type of like well ripped type thing. So it's pretty cool.
I have to look more buildings up then, and I definitely have to go to Milwaukee and check that building
Yeah,
out.
you gotta check. How far are you from there?
About an hour.
Oh, okay, that's not bad. That's
Not bad at all. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so going back to you choosing mechanical engineering and going through your journey, what did you find challenging? You went to Arizona State University, right? What were the challenges that you encountered, like classes or the support system in your school? Like maybe you didn't have tutors. Like what are the things that you had to overcome as a student?
I like, it's funny you say tutors, and I'm like, I know all about tutoring centers as a professor, but like as a student, I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm sure we had those resources, but I don't remember anyone ever talking about tutoring centers. So I guess definitely not having that resource, not knowing about that resource would be a problem. We had office hours from professors, but a lot of my professors were like really intimidating. I didn't ever go to office hours to see a professor until grad school. That was the first time I ever went to office hours, which is crazy, right? Like, and then as a professor, like I had students, I was always like, come to my office hours, come to my office hours, office hours, office hours. But like at Arizona State University, our professors' office hours, I think they were on the syllabus, but I don't remember them ever really being brought up much. And I think it was only like an hour, and you had to schedule by an appointment or something like that. And so I never did it. And then I did have like a bunch of people I knew in engineering, which was super helpful. So like all of the fellow students, like we would work together. If I had a class that I didn't have like peers in my cohort in, that was really hard. Like I took physics before all the other students like that I was in the same cohort with.
Oh, you were the guinea pig.
Yeah. So like because I took it my first semester of college, and a lot of my peers were taking chemistry, but I already took chemistry in high school, and I already did like all my calc in high school. So then they were like, well, you can take physics then your first semester. So I didn't know anybody, and they were all older than me, and they're all kind of like, who is this person? Like we've never seen her in classes. Like she really doesn't belong here. And so that was kind of that mentality of like not feeling like I belong. Sometimes people said it, and sometimes people like made it clear. And then sometimes
people said it. People say that.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Really?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Or like, like, wow, you don't look smart. And I'm like, well, what does smart look like? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
wow.
Like, oh, you don't look smart either. Thanks. Like, I don't know. Is that a like, it's one of those things you're like, I don't know if you're trying to compliment me or mean or like, but it is a little discouraging. So like,
yeah, I don't understand why people would say that. It's just, I don't know either. It's just, anyway, but you're here now. You're doing amazing. So,
and we also didn't have like a really strong community of women on that campus, because I was on the Polytechnic campus and it was all like STEM fields and STEM majors. So me, like my best friend, like another one of my friends, and myself, and then like a few advisors, like at that point we didn't really have any female engineering professors yet. We did end up getting a female engineering professor like a couple before I left. But we had an advisor from career services and another person from psychology. They helped us start a women in science engineering organization on the campus, which was really cool. And so I've been a part of Society of Women Engineers and Women in Science and Engineering. Like I've done both organizations, really like them. That particular campus, I'm really glad we went with WISE, Women in Science and Engineering, because we didn't have very many engineers and female engineers. So that was nice when we started that. Then we started having a community of women, and that like really helped a lot. So then it was like I could have girlfriends that I could hang out with, and then also I could still have people I study with in engineering. And study groups were huge. Like that was so important. Like when I didn't have study groups, that definitely was a distraction. That was a challenge.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like one of the things that I share, like you say, it's having a study group, having people that you can teach, people that you can ask questions. I was very lucky to run into my friend, Korean dude. I ran into him my first semester at Virginia. So I'm a transfer student. I went to a community college my first 2 years, and then I transferred to Virginia Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so my first day at Virginia Tech, I remember I was walking around. It was statistics.
Yeah.
It was like an 8 a.m. Wednesday class. Campus was empty. Yeah. Campus was empty. Getting a little chilly already in Blacksburg, Virginia. And I remember walking around. I get into class. There's no one. I'm like, okay, well, what time does the class start?
Yeah.
It was 8 a.m. Nothing. And then Korean dude arrives, my friend. Well, eventual friend. And then he's like, what time does the class start? I was like, well, I thought 8 a.m. Anyway, the class started at 9:30. So
Really?
So I was like, great start to transferring here to Virginia Tech. Great start.
Right.
Anyway, so he and I, we started talking and we kind of just became friends. And then we just happened to be taking a bunch of classes together.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that was, and he was very smart. He was like your typical 3.8, 3.9 type of like GPA type of student.
Yeah.
And I graduated with a 3.2 or so. So
very good for engineering.
Right. Thank you. So, and then I remember like he would always beat me on tests, like on thermodynamics. We would have studied together. We would study the same thing.
Yeah.
And then, but I knew he told me that sometimes he would go home and study even more. I would go home and just sleep. I'm like, I'm going to sleep.
Yeah. You're like, cheater, you're studying more than me.
Yeah,
wonder why.
And then I never remember one day that I actually beat him on a test on heat transfer. We're taking a heat transfer, and I beat him for once, and I was like, "Oh, I beat you, motherfucker!" Anyway, so they just started laughing. We had a good time. He's in California now.
I think that part is huge, though. Like that friendly competition, where sometimes it feels like, I hate you. Why do you beat me on every test, and why are you the best in every class? But then most of the time, it's just like, it's that extra push for the challenge.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
That was like a huge motivation. Yeah,
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Do you have that with your friends? With your
for sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, like I ended up being the one that like was like kind of the brat of like, what the heck? You did really good on the exam. Like, shut up. You can't be upset that you missed 2 points. Like, get out of here. I don't want to talk to you. Then I'd be like, okay. I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah.
Oh. But sometimes sometimes it would be like, like you get beat by a couple points. And I was like, I don't know. And then being like one of the only women, sometimes I was like, I want to like represent for the women. Like, we're going to do better. Like it was that, which sometimes like gives you like more anxiety in the class and more stress, but also sometimes it gives you like that more motivation of like, no, I want to like prove like it's,
right.
that we can do this. But like the reality is like women can do this, anyone can do this, anyone can do engineering.
Anyone.
You don't have to prove anything. But if you want to like go be competitive because you're a competitive person like I am, then go have fun with it. But don't worry about proving anything for anyone.
Right. Yeah. No, I like the mentality. Just go out and do it for yourself. And then as long as you're doing better than you did, or at least just as good, just as well, then just keep going. Yeah. One of the things that, what would you say to people or to students who say, or who think, oh man, engineering is too hard. Like, I don't think I can do it. Like, what would you say to those people?
It's funny because I just was talking to a friend about that the other day. Like somehow it came up, like I am starting this YouTube channel and all these things. And she was like, oh yeah, I don't really know anything about engineering other than engineering is hard. And I was like, really? And I was like, I guess that is the common message. And I guess I would say like, does it require dedication? Yes. Mm-hmm. Is it too hard? No, absolutely not. Like engineering requires dedication, it requires time. And yes, there will be like some hurdles along the way, but like, that's not the idea of what it is. Like, I think it's important that we let go of that because I think sometimes it's like sports. Like I can't think of like some sports that's like an elitist sport or whatever. Like, I don't know if there's any that have a reputation of being hard.
Football is hard.
Football's hard. Like they're all hard, but it's like, I don't know
elite
if there's
level
a sport that like stands out that's like, this is the hardest of all the sports. Is there? Rugby,
I would say MMA is a pretty hardcore sport.
yeah. Like MMA, like I feel like sometimes they're kind of like, yeah, like if they're like, this is the hardest, this requires the most dedication, da 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 da. Like there's some like pride to that of like you want to be like the hardest of, it's like you're all professional athletes. Anyone who's made it, like, can you just all be happy for each other and not be like who's better than the other? And I think engineering, sometimes we get this like engineering pride of like, well, we're the hardest of the degrees, we're the best, and like da da da, and like, so I think sometimes that actually scares people away. And it's like, yes, it's good to have pride in what we do and like to be passionate about what we do, but we don't want to be so strenuous that we start scaring other people away from joining, because it is a lot of dedication. It's going to be a lot of math. It's going to be a lot of science, but you don't have to love math. You don't have to love science. I mean, it helps. It makes it fun, but it's also like, I don't think it's too hard for anyone to do it. You know, like I've seen a lot of engineering students that I had that they came in and they were like very intimidated and they were scared about the class. Like when I was teaching the coding class, I remember a few students coming in that like didn't even know how to manage folders on their desktop or like on their laptop or anything. And they couldn't even navigate like very basic, like managing windows and opening applications. And I was thinking to myself, like, man, I feel like any other professor would be like, not any other, but a lot of other engineering professors would be like, just leave. Like, you're not going to understand programming by the time you leave this class. Like, you can't even navigate your own computer. And I was just like, you know what? Like, this is going to be a little bit of a roadblock. And I tell them, like, I'm upfront with them. I'm like, this is going to require more work for you than it probably will for someone else. And somebody, especially who has like a coding background, but you are capable of doing this if you are willing to put in the work. So I would say the same thing to anyone. Like, if you are willing to put in the work, you are capable of being an engineer. And like, understand that there's more to engineering than just being hard. Like, we get to, like we were talking about before, like, we get to make a huge impact on society, and we get to help decide where like technology goes next and like where we're going in the future. And like, it's pretty important that we're all represented in that. Like, I want more women in engineering because I would like a woman's voice to be heard in where society is going next with technology. Like, that's important to me. So that everyone else should feel the same way about themselves. Like, don't you want to be heard, and don't you want to be a part of deciding where we go next with technology and innovation and all these different designs?
I can feel the passion. That's wonderful to hear. Beautifully said. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I think I definitely agree that a lot of the times it can be intimidating for somebody that wants to go. It was intimidating for me, for sure. Wouldn't have to go that far. Like when I first started, deep down, I wanted to do engineering. Ever since I grew up, I wanted to be an engineer like my dad when I was growing up. He's a geological engineer.
Nice.
But then I picked computer science for one reason. Because it sounded cool. It was nice to tell people at the grocery store. I would tell people at the grocery store, yeah, I'm a computer science major. Everybody would be like, wow, you must be so smart, like blah, blah. But then little did they know, I took my first computer science class and I was like, yo, I'm out of here. And so when I went from computer science, I was like, okay, what do I do now? And like you were saying, it can be intimidating because I was like, okay, I literally, shit you not, I was thinking, I don't want to get to my junior year and I don't want my brain to explode because it's just, maybe I'm not going to finish it or it's just too hard. You know, it's like, I was already thinking so far ahead. But like you were saying, like one of the things that you need to do is just take it one step at a time. Don't get ahead of yourself. You know, it's like, if you're taking calculus 1 this semester, don't pay attention to calculus 2. Like, you're wasting your time.
It'd be too overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're in chapter 1, don't pay attention to chapter 3 or 4 because you're going to overwhelm yourself. You start seeing all these crazy curves, these crazy figures, shapes, and you're like, what in the world is this? When in reality, it's actually a lot simpler than that. So, but yeah, no, it can be intimidating for some people, but just take baby steps, right? So just take one class, another class, and then see what happens. Okay, wonderful. So that's with respect to your journey in engineering. And so before we leave your engineering journey as a student, how did you get a job, or you went to get your PhD? What happened there when you were a senior, junior? Like, what was going through your mind?
So part of it was I did get an engineering internship my summer after my sophomore year. And then I continued working with that company all through college. So during the summers, I would work like full time, like 40, 60 hours, whatever that looked like. And then during the school year, I'd work normally about 20 hours a week for them during the school year. And then
well, that's a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah, it was awesome. So it was really nice that it was right near my house.
So how'd you get that opportunity?
I worked at career services when I was at Arizona State University my freshman year and my sophomore year. And so I would go to the career fair every semester and help host the career fair. And then I would go talk to employers there. And then I met someone who worked for a company that was, they were there hiring. And we had a really good conversation. And because I worked for career services, I kind of had like a little like one-up experience on cover letters, resumes. Yeah. So I wrote a cover letter to the employer and sent my resume in. And the owner of the company, he ended up calling me in and like had me come in for an interview. And he was like, I just want you to know the reason that I brought you in is because you wrote the best cover letter I have ever seen in like the history of like getting and reviewing applications, like ever.
So you need to put that cover letter up on your YouTube channel. So everyone go check out Kelsey's YouTube channel.
I don't know if I have that somewhere. I should look for it.
Yeah, you better find that and just post it out. This is exactly what I wrote. This is the psychology behind it.
Yeah.
So what do you remember what you put on it?
I remember the main thing. I mean, I just followed the general format that I would always teach people at career services of how to do a cover letter. And then I made it a point to be like personable and say like, hey, I met you at the career fair. And then every time I met someone at the career fair, I'd walk away and I'd like write a bunch of notes of like my favorite things that they talked about. So then when I wrote the letter, I wrote like, here's the different projects that you brought up when we were talking at the career fair that I was really intrigued by. And so the fact that I was like showing that I remembered and I cared and it was very tailored to them, I think was a big part of it. And then I like highlighted, I had no experience at that point in the engineering field, but I had experience on projects and classes. I had experience like transferable work skills that we like to talk about, from other jobs. And so I highlighted all of those in my cover letter as like main points. And then that way it was like really easy to look at my resume and it's like, oh yeah, she does have everything to back up what she's saying in her cover letter. Yeah.
Interesting. So what would you tell people who have no experience and they sell themselves short?
My big thing I would say is like, I mean, sometimes it might help to just talk to a friend and like someone who's like very supportive of you and like maybe tell them some about what you've done, or someone who's like mentoring you and let them help you see how great you are. Because sometimes it is hard to like tease out, okay, what is it that I've really even done with my life? And it's like, okay, stop. Like if you've ever trained anyone at any job, you're demonstrating leadership right there. And I know a lot of people work as like a cashier or a waitress or a waiter, somewhere in a different company that they're like, well, that's nothing engineering. And it's like, well, hang on. Did you ever train anybody else how to do your job? And did you ever help bring new people in? Like, okay, you have demonstrated more leadership than most other people who haven't had those kind of experiences. Or even just teamwork, like the amount of teamwork that you have to do in a restaurant or retail or anywhere is huge. And that's what we're always emphasizing in engineering is like, what's the number one skill that employers are looking for? Communication. And then like, teamwork's on there pretty high up, and leadership again shows up. And those are things that, yes, we can demonstrate in the classroom some, but like where you're really going to have to learn how to demonstrate that is with a huge group of people or tons of people that you don't really know. And like, maybe you have different backgrounds and like, you don't really get along that well too, like, or customer service is huge. So I always tell people, if you've had any kind of job where you're working at any kind of restaurant or beauty salon or retail, make sure you have something with customer service. And I always say something like, ensure 100% customer service satisfaction by whatever, like you can say mitigating these different problems, or by making sure to like pay attention to their needs and like be available and, you know, whatever it is. But like, that's huge. I mean, you know, right? Like you're telling me like just earlier that it's all about making sure your customer's happy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Happy. Like your boss is happy.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the bottom line. And it's like, that reminds me of approximately about a year ago. I made a video about how customer service jobs and retail jobs actually helped me to be an engineer, which is something that not many people may make the connection to. It's like, well, how can working at your local discount store can help you be a better engineer? But like, yeah, it's all customer service. You know, that's really all it is. Because if you're an engineer, you have a client. You're working for someone. Even if you have your own firm, even if you have your own company, you have someone that you are accountable to. So, and you need to communicate with that person. And the way you talk to that person is different than when you talk to your coworker. It's just a completely different dynamic that you just pick up with experience and watching people. One of the things that I tell people here in the channel is like, just watch what other older engineers do, watch what they don't do, how they do it. If you think it's wrong, don't do it.
Well, and it's like talking amongst a bunch of engineers, like sometimes I feel like we have a whole different language. Like when I'm with a group of like engineers and then there's non-engineers around, sometimes like the non-engineers will come tell me later, like, oh, you guys were like really weird the way you interact. And I'm like, I didn't even think anything of it. And I'm like, I guess we do have a different way of thinking that we're trained into. I mean, that is what engineering does. So it's nice to be able to interface or like interact with non-engineers, which is what we do when we have those like service positions, like you're saying, and we need to be able to do with our clients because most of our clients aren't engineers.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they're probably a business background or if that.
Right.
So the one thing, so you do have a really cool resume video that I watched earlier. That was really cool, like how you go step by step, section by section. You start describing like what to do, what not to do. If you do yoga,
don't include yoga.
don't put it on your resume.
But you could include some hobbies sometimes.
Yeah, that was funny.
I've had some few exceptions.
Right. Okay, so you had your internship, and then over the years you worked at school. So when you graduated, did you go straight into your PhD program, or
I did?
And why did you get a PhD? Did you get a master's too also?
I did not.
Straight
it was
to
an
PhD.
extra piece of paperwork that I, during my PhD, I failed to file. I was so that's the reality of it.
Wait, what happened?
Oh, like when I was getting my PhD, I was like, oh, I could file this extra piece of paperwork and get a master's at the same time too. And like do a few extra things. And I was like, I don't really want to deal with the paperwork right now.
I think at that point you're already like pretty like checked out. Like, you're like, I just want to get this over with.
Like I was like, yeah, like please help me. I just need to finish.
Yeah.
It's an overwhelming process. But part of it was during my undergrad. So in my last year of my undergrad,
I have something to tell you after you tell your story. Like it just something that came to mind. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say in my last year of my undergrad, I did research with one of my professors. So a professor who came from Purdue University, she came and started, well, anyway, let me start over. But yeah, like, so she graduated in engineering education at Purdue University, came to Arizona State University as an engineering professor. And I started conducting research with her. And she taught me all about her degree and like, you know, how she got into it. And I enjoyed what we were doing. Like we were studying how engineering students learned engineering concepts, and the specific one was like, how did someone learn how to create programs in LabVIEW and like different ways of teaching instead of just lecturing. And so we created like different LabVIEW programs, and then we would say like, okay, all the concepts that you need to learn are in this program. Your job is to recreate the program to be even better by like using the concepts in here. And it was just a lot of fun. And I realized at that point, my favorite part of engineering was learning. And I was like, I love learning and I love how to learn. Like, I love the learning process of how to think like an engineer. And to me, that became the most intriguing thing. And that's what the engineering education program was all about, was like researching how engineers learn different engineering concepts. And so I went out and got my PhD. I was like, all right, grad school, here I come.
Oh, that's awesome. So what are your findings when it comes to, based on what you've seen in your experience, what are the biggest challenges that engineering students face?
It's a lot of different answers in that, but I've done a lot of stuff with like modeling. So how students learn modeling concepts. So first off, it's just figuring out, okay, when you come into engineering, what is a model? Like, what am I talking about? Like mathematical models, computational models, CAD models, engineering drawings, prototypes. And like most engineering students first just think prototypes. Like they're like physical models, prototypes, that's the only thing they've really interacted with most of the time. And then trying to help them understand like, okay, there's different types of modeling that you're going to have to do as an engineer. And this is a tool that you can use to help you with designing something or trying to help someone understand something or analyzing data or just like a lot of different pathways. So that's like a really hard question to answer because again, it's a very context specific thing. So if we're talking about like, what's the hardest thing, like what's the thing that most first year engineering students struggle with the most, or like big picture. Yeah. Like at Embry-Riddle, we had a big problem with a lot of students failing Physics 1, Calculus 1, and Introduction to Computing, which was a MATLAB class that I taught. And
I would be in that cohort that failing programming.
So there was like, and that was a huge problem. We were like, okay, everyone's failing these classes. Like, what do we do? And we have a huge failure rate. Like our failure rate for that course when I started, some of them I think was as high as 40% failure rate, which is a huge problem.
What's the benchmark? What's the baseline? Like, what's the average, I guess?
I would say like under 15% failure rate, like they're not going to flag you. Over 15% failure rate for a course, like they're going to start flagging the course and be like, okay, what's happening? Yeah, and we're hitting around, we were like in the upwards of the 40s sometimes for some of the sections.
So what do you do when you have that much failure rate and you already used up all your resources? You know that you're doing the best you can. You've done your research. You surveyed students, like, and then you still get that much failure. What do? You just make it easier, or what happens?
So with that course, they had me come on and do taking over the course and like making changes and like kind of studying what was happening. And one of the things that I was seeing is like for the computer programming course is we had all these different tests and exams where we're testing students. Like one, it was a lot to cover within a short period of time, which is very common in engineering. And I don't think it's a fault of the students. I think it's a fault of the professor. If you have a 50% average in your class and you are curving your class, there is something wrong with your professor, not your students. Like that's just my opinion. Anyway, so I was like, okay, this is a problem. One, we need to like scale down these exams. You know, we shouldn't have really high failure rate on exams. Especially like, one, are we teaching this content? Like, is this exam something we actually cover in this class? Or is it one of those stupid things where we, you know, I've seen a lot of those like engineering memes where it's like what we do in class and it's something like really simple, A plus B equals C. And then like, what do we do on homework? And it's like, okay, like a little bit more complicated, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And it's like, okay, not too bad. And then what do we do on the test? And then it's like giant like integrals and derivatives. And you're like, wait a minute, that wasn't anything.
Right.
And so it's like making sure that we don't have a class like that. I always say like, for me, the most complicated thing I would give students was typically their homework assignments and projects. So those would be the most complicated things in class. The exam should be somewhere in between like the level of what an in-class activity and like a homework assignment is. Like I would say that's what I would always aim for, because like I should be assessing what they're learning, which should be what I'm teaching, not just like, hey, this is what I would expect a professional industry to be able to do. And it's like, well, that's not what we taught. And then the other part was like, we were seeing that a lot of students were failing the test because of different reasons. Like, so with programming, like if you're creating a computer program, before you actually go in and you code everything, first you have to be able to do the actual problem on paper, right? And so sometimes we were teaching all of that, or we were testing it all at once. And so sometimes somebody would be failing this, like the entire exam, but really where they failed was they didn't know how to get it done on paper. And it's like, okay, if you can't solve a problem on paper, then that's what I need to be teaching you. And so sometimes we would spend way too much time like talking about the syntax and like, do you know how to do an if statement? Do you know how to do a for loop?
Mm-hmm.
And a student's like, I'm doing great, I'm fine over here. But then they're like, we're ignoring this whole part of like, they have no foundation of how to solve this like problem that maybe it would be something simple in physics, but they haven't even taken physics yet. So it's like, for them, it's like huge.
Right, right.
So a lot of it was like, you have to really dive down into the student work. And like, it's a lot of just understanding the problem. And once you understand that problem, then implementing big changes of like, how do we address that?
How many semesters did it take you to get all this data and implement the changes?
Like probably over like the course of a year of like teaching it, like I was kind of like observing it in the class and like collecting all the data and like looking at it all. Maybe it was like over 2 years of teaching it, and then like over one summer of like rigorously going down and being like, all right, like this whole summer is just dedicated to this, and then we're like launching it in the fall. So it really depends on like, does the university support it? And so that was one thing that I will say is really nice. Like Embry-Riddle like saw the problem and they were like, all right, we'll put money towards this, like let's support it. So my summers were for research, and so I would be paid by research. And so they were like, well, we're willing to pay for part of your summer to do this project. And so a lot of it in a university setting comes down to like, is the university willing to put the support towards that? And if they're not, like, it's really hard as a professor. It's like you're doing a lot of like extra free work if you're putting a lot of extra time into that. So it's sometimes hard to like, I'll look at other professors, like when I was a professor, I'd be like, oh, I can't believe you're still doing that in your class. Like, that's awful. But then I'd be like, okay, at the same time, like, I understand, like, if you're not getting any funding and backing and support, and you're getting all this demand in different directions, like, that's tough. Like, I don't know. And
so it's not all the professor's fault.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's hard because it's like there's a lot of institutional barriers, I think, for engineering students. That engineering students will see. But there's also a lot of institutional barriers for engineering professors that I don't think the students see as much. And like, I know when I was a faculty advisor for Society of Women Engineers, like sometimes I would let my students in like a little bit more insight into what was going on. And like, they would be like, I had no idea, like some of the different students I advised and mentored. And like, especially after I left the university and like people had more questions, like I would talk more openly about different things.
Yeah.
And they were like, what? And they were like, I didn't know that's how universities worked. And I was like, yeah, like that's how they work, kind of. I mean,
yeah, that's like, you got to get that money, right? A lot of the times also like professors are mainly researchers, and then they kind of teach you maybe because they have to. And then they don't, and then I think they don't care at some point. It's just like, they send the teacher's assistant or whomever, the research assistant to teach. And they're like, I'm just doing it because I have to. Like, I really, like, I'm more worried about this, all the research over here that I'm not getting results and I'm getting funded for it.
Yes. And I think some of it is like, you don't care. And I think sometimes some of it is like, the professors who do care, the burnout is so fast. It's insane because you're not getting rewarded for that most of the time. Like so you're doing that all as like free work. And like, I remember like sometimes like I would like go home and I would just be so like burned out and tired. And I'd be like, oh my God, like if I spent a lot of time in office hours with students, like it would be like really hard and like mentally exhausting to know that like when I go home, like all of those hours I spent with my students, I'm going to have to make up in my free time because those don't count as my hours towards my job. And I think like in the beginning, like and some of us professors would do that, like go and do extra things like that. But I couldn't imagine sustaining that for decades. Like, and it's like, so that's one of the things I started to wonder is like, okay, these professors who've been here for like 30 years plus, it's like, were they ever like that in the beginning and they just quit doing it because they gave up and they gave up hope? Or have they always just been really hard and like ignoring students and not caring? And like, maybe that's just their personalities. They really don't care. Or it is interesting.
Yeah. Do you think those professors that don't care as much, do you think they just curve the grades and then just like, all right, I'm just going to comply with the requirements and it is what it is type thing?
Yes. I've seen professors do it. Yes, I've absolutely seen professors just curve the grades because they just don't care anymore. Absolutely. It's really tough and frustrating because the other thing is, it's like the people who are getting robbed the most from that is the engineering students.
Right.
You know, like financially it's going to suck failing a class and having to pay for another class. Have I ever failed a class before? Yes, I have. And I'd be happy to talk about that another time. Like, it happens, you know? And, but like, it would be better to fail a class and have to retake it and pay for that semester again, but actually learn it, than to just like skirt by because you had a professor who stopped caring and just handed out grades because they wanted to beat some numbers so they didn't get flagged.
Right.
But they definitely, like, course evals are so real. Like, that is a huge impact. If you do not like your professor, put it in a course eval, because those course evals help decide the professor's pay increase at some universities, like a lot of universities. If you like a professor,
I'm putting this clip on TikTok.
Oh my God, that's awesome. But it really does. Like, it makes a huge difference. But it's hard because, like, yeah, when you're a professor and you're getting like really good course evals, you're like, sweet, like that's really nice. I've had like a few times where it's like I'd have one student in a whole semester that just like hated me, and I was like, and they were pretty open about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're like, cool, thanks, man. Like, so glad you hate me so much, but whatever. And then you see the course eval come and you're like, well, I know who this one is. All ones, like, thank you, sir, for taking my class, or thank you, whoever.
Wow.
Which, it's like, it hurts a little, but it's like, okay.
So you develop a pretty thick skin as a professor, huh?
Oh my goodness, yeah. But like, the other thing is, like, I worked with a colleague of mine, and that had like this reputation for, like, a lot of people were like, oh, this professor like doesn't care, and you know, he's just like makes everything so hard, and like a lot of students didn't really like him that much, and I don't know why. Like, honestly, I'm not sure why. But then, like, when we worked together, I would watch him spend more time than most of my colleagues on like office hours, prepping materials, grading materials, really trying to understand every single one of his students as an individual. And then going in, like, and really caring about, like, I want them to learn this. And I don't know why. Like, I think part of it was just like a reputation, like one of those things of like, he already had a bad reputation because of like something that happened like semesters ago, and it kind of just like continued on. And like, so a lot of people didn't give him a chance to get to know him. And like, when I got to know him, I was like, man, this guy's like really cares about his students, like more than most other people I meet here. You know? And so I would say that happens too. And like, it would be hard because like some people are like, oh, there's no way he cares. And I mean, like, I saw him get real upset sometimes about his students, and like he got to a point he stopped reading his course evaluations because they like hurt so much. And it's like, man, like, I guess sometimes, like, when I was a student, I would kind of forget that, like, oh yeah, this is a person too. You know what I mean? Like, this is a person, they have feelings, they have emotions, they have like reactions just like any other person, because you start to see them as like this like roadblock on the way to your success, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I think it's important for people to also understand what the other side of the coin, the professors, because I mean, as a former student in university, and I mean, I still hear now you always, the professors always get all the blame, and the professors suck and they don't teach well. And a lot of times, I mean, with a good reason, you know, it's like, if you just show up and start reading off slides and then you don't care, I mean, of course, and then not to mention that we humans tend to remember all the negative things over the positive ones anyways. So that just makes it even worse. You know, it's like, unless you are an extraordinary professor that just really shows that he or she cares, then then you're just not going to be able to overcome that negative perception that the students already have of professors.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's like, geez.
I know, it's funny because I actually, like, funny little side story. I had a professor I really didn't like at all, and I had to have him for multiple classes, which really sucked. And anyway, like, it was funny. One day I came to class and he was one of those professors that would just like, he would pull up the PowerPoint slides that came with the book that he didn't write, just like a random book. And he would literally like click through these slides from this book. And I was like, dude, are you kidding me? Like, you can't even make your own PowerPoint slides. You can't do anything. And day one of the semester, every time without fail was literally the PowerPoint slides of the table of contents. And he would read the freaking table of contents on the first day every time. And so you're like going through the table of contents and he's like, yeah, we'll cover that. And he'd be like, oh, this, like, we're not going to really go over that too much this semester. Oh, this. And he's like, yep, we'll be covering that. And I was like, oh my God, what a nightmare. So that's one day I come to class and, you know, I like don't even really want to go because I'm like, oh, what a nightmare. What are we going to do? Read through the book again? And I come to class and the PowerPoint or the computers went down. And I was like, oh, dang, what's going to happen next? And he's like, well, I guess since the computers are down, like, I'm just going to have to do this old fashioned way. And he like wheels over this whiteboard and he gets out all these markers. And then he starts drawing this on the board. And it was for statics. It was either statics or dynamics semester, but I had him for both, but it was one of those classes. And he starts drawing everything on the board and like walking through it and talking about the forces one at a time and gets into like all this detail that he has never gone into in any of our classes. And I was like, oh my God, technology has ruined your teaching, sir. Like, you need to be on a whiteboard every day. And so I think sometimes like the older, like old school professors, like allow technology to drive what they're doing instead of like using technology as a tool to help them. And I've actually read like a research paper about that one of my PhD advisors wrote. And it was like, you know, he was talking about that and I was like, I've seen that firsthand. And so it's kind of like interesting. Yeah.
Oh, that's actually very, very insightful. I guess you could say, okay, if I already have all the figures, then why am I going to redo them? It's just a waste of time.
Exactly. But it's like you need to see that process of like that getting drawn out.
Like how does that get built type thing? Like what's interesting.
I know. And I will say I did not do it, but I highly, like, I really considered it. On that day, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to come to class early from here on out, and I'm going to sabotage these computers every time I come to class. That way he has to write on a whiteboard.
Right.
I couldn't do it, but I really considered it. I was like, I know. I was like, if I unplug it, will that be like too easy? Was he going to figure that out? Like, I was like, maybe I can like just figure out where the circuit breaker is and like break in somewhere.
That's hilarious. Wow. So that was your PhD general highlights per se, and then the story on. So when do you join industry, by the way?
Like, are you talking about as of right now?
Yeah, because right now you do consulting, right?
Well, I do more consulting on side, like the engineering education research side.
Oh,
so different
okay.
things with oh God, like, you know, just like looking at retention or helping women with introduce them to engineering or getting all started in that area. Yeah.
So what are the tools that you would use or that you use in order to increase retention in engineering for women?
I would vote that like from like a research side or from like let me
from an execution side.
Okay.
Like what are the things that you would say, you know what, if we want to retain females in engineering, would that also be applicable to men? The same
Absolutely.
Strategy? So okay, so a more general question would be, how do you increase retention in engineering?
So there's a lot of different research out on that. But some of the things that I would say that I've read or I've seen or I've worked with others to do is like, again, like we were talking about earlier, building community. Like community is huge, because if we don't have peers around us, it's really hard. And again, like it does help if you have someone else, like one of your peers that look at least somewhat like you, because then you're watching someone else like further along in the career that you're like, oh, that looks like me. I can visualize that being me. They're being successful. Like you have like a direct image of like, okay, this is feasible for me, which also with that comes like mentorship. Mentorship is huge, making sure you have good mentors. Your mentors do not need to look like you, but it is nice to also have some role models somewhere that you're like, okay. So for me, like seeing a woman who's been successful in engineering and like the first computer programmer was Ada Lovelace. So it's kind of cool. You're like, oh, there's a woman was the first computer programmer, or like, you know, said to have written the first like coding concepts. And like, that's pretty cool. Or like when I was younger, I always admire Marie Curie. I was like,
so who do you think she looked up to? What's the first woman?
Like
I
don't know. Because she was back in the what year? I have a video on that. I can't even remember what year it was that she was born. That's so bad. It's just so much information. Like facts and dates like are sometimes like in one year out of the other. Yeah. I'm more of an equation kind of girl. I think that's why I love engineering.
Right.
I've always been good at the facts. I'm like, let me put that in an Excel file and I know how to reference it, or let me know how to look information up on Google. Like that's what I've learned in engineering. I still don't know how to like retain every single date and all of that. I'm like, I know how to Google that.
You're right. It's a couple of keystrokes. So what do you think about, okay, what about the first person? Who did they look up to?
That's like blows my mind. It's like, I mean, maybe they found like some people in their community, but it's like the roadblocks that they had to face, I can't even imagine, because like I already sometimes will be a little bit bitter about like, oh, I have to face this roadblock of like someone said I don't look smart, and it's like I'll get really upset, and it is, it's like it's hurtful, but at the same time it's like if I look at those women who were like, you know, spearheading all this stuff and like the pioneers, and it's like what they were doing, it's like I can't even fathom that. Like I remember reading about like the first woman who has a PhD in mathematics, like, or a doctorate in mathematics. She could not study mathematics, even though she was showing like this remarkable ability. Like it was against the culture, and her dad didn't like it. So she couldn't study mathematics until she got married, and she got married to move out of the house and study math. And I'm like, oh my God, could you imagine being like 18 years old and being like, finally, I'm gonna like, I'm just gonna get married. That way I can go do what I want to do and like study math.
Wow.
Like that's a whole nother level. Or being told like, I'm sorry, you can't come to this university because this university doesn't allow women. Like, I just can't imagine like living in that kind of era.
Yeah, right.
And so it's really cool to see that they've done it. And it's like, okay, I look at how far we've come in the last like 100, 200 years. And it's like thinking about like, where are we going to be in the next 100 years? Like, we could be super far. Like, let's hope we are. Yeah.
Reminds me of, what was the famous female pilot, Amelia Earhart?
Amelia Earhart, yeah.
Yeah. So how she became, was she the one that had the longest flight record at the time for a female, right? And then she fought against everything that she wanted to become a pilot. And then, I mean, eventually she passed, I think, on a trip to somewhere. I think she was trying to break a record, and then something happened. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think she was going to be the first one across the Atlantic I'd have to look up the details there, but we talk about it a lot because at Purdue University. Yeah.
And then I also think of someone that's less technical was the trendsetter. What's the very famous brand? Was that Chanel? Coco Chanel.
Oh, maybe. I don't.
Yeah, I was reading that. Was this in the 20s? I think it was 20s or 30s. That she was very liberal and very with respect to her clothing, was very different than what women tended to wear at the time. That was very strict and hard, like the corsets and all that stuff. Yeah. And so she started having all these outfits that were looser and that were more comfortable. And apparently she started getting calls from a lot of women say, hey, like, where'd you get that? Like, I want something like that. Like, and then so she started setting a trend on like the new clothing and being more comfortable. And then anyway, so her brand eventually obviously took off, but yeah, it takes those those first people to spearhead a certain, and then just go for it regardless of what's going to happen. And if you told no, then just keep going. And just one of those things.
Exactly. And I think that's still like now, like if you're told no, if you believe in it, like keep going, like you said.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good trait to have for everyone, like males, females. Like if you're told no and then you still want to do it, then just go ahead and do it and then see what happens. And it's just wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing, like to what's important in engineering. I think what you just said is like hugely important to be successful in engineering too, is like no matter how much you're told no, like, or like you don't fit in or any of that, like if you believe in it, then keep going with it. And if you stop believing in it, talk to someone else who can re-spark that like belief in you so you can keep going, because that is hugely important. And I remember like when I was younger, I used to play soccer and like, I wasn't like super good or anything. Like I was okay. Yeah. But I would always get like trophies and medals and it would be like most determined on the team. Like, like really wanted, like you could tell I wanted to win. Like I was always super competitive. Like I wanted to be really good and I tried really hard. And they were like, you tried hard, kid. Like, you know? Yeah. But like, that was so important when I got into engineering, of like being super determined. You know, and like every time someone said no, or like, you know, like, oh, you're not good enough or you don't fit in. And it's just like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. Like, I'm going to keep going. Like, I can do this. Like, I'm going to do this. And then again, like relying on your support network, because otherwise you burn out. Like if you're just taking all of that on your own and you're not like relying on others to like help you through it, you will burn out. Yeah.
And I think now that you mentioned that, you know, sometimes you don't need, it doesn't have to be that one person who tells you don't fit in or you're not good enough. Sometimes it's yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like, sometimes it's you get a bad grade here and they're like, oh shit, man. And then you get another 40% here, another 35% on the other. It's like, fuck, what am I doing wrong? Yes. So you start having this doubt, and then like, it's for a reason. That there's a saying that you are your own worst enemy or your worst critic or something like that. Yes. So sometimes it doesn't take that one person that tells you, oh, you don't fit in. Sometimes it's just yourself that you are putting those roadblocks up on yourself. And then I think it's important to say, shut up, and then just keep going. Like, what?
And to just to add on to that. Like, I will say I have a PhD now. Awesome. I graduated my undergrad. Awesome. I failed physics 1 twice. I had to take it a third time. Yes. So just because you fail stuff doesn't mean like it is the end of it for you. You know, that was very discouraging when it happened to me. But I even had to petition the university to allow me to stay in engineering and take it the third time. And they allowed me. And now I have a PhD. So really, failure does not mean you can't succeed anyway, and it doesn't mean you can't graduate. And like, yes, I told myself, and there was plenty like restless, sleepless nights and crying and thinking I had to drop out, but I've made it.
Very impressive. Like, so what do you think were the concepts just really hard? I mean physics is hard.
That was some of it. There was circumstances too, like, you know, like life happens. Sometimes like, you know, it was my first semester of college. I didn't have any like study. I had one study friend in the class, and then they kind of like, things didn't go well with that friendship, and that kind of was like a determinant. And like, I wanted to withdraw, and my professor wouldn't let me withdraw, so I just had to take the F, and I just kind of gave. And then it's a whole nother story. But anyway, basically, it was just like feeling like I didn't fit in, feeling like a failure. And the second time I did it, like I was like so up in my head and judgmental and critical the whole time. It was hard for me to ever be open to like learning and participating and being a part of. And I just kind of like started ditching class and avoided the rest of it, and was like,
how did you overcome that?
I think part of it was like, I moved my sophomore year. I moved in with a few friends in engineering, and we lived in a house together, and it was like us girls. And that like we ended up all taking engineering at the same time. And the other thing was like, I had a few friends who failed it. Like it was their first time failing it versus my second time. But like watching someone else fail it, and then they were trying it again, and they were like, we're going to do this as a team. And we all came into it together, and we're like, okay, we all signed up for the same professor, the same section.
Mm-hmm.
And every week we had study groups, sometimes a couple times a week, and we would sit down together. We did every homework assignment together. We studied together beyond the homework, and we sat down and we would just like read the book. It also helped that I had a new professor. Like a new professor came to our university to start the class. And that really helped because it was just like being able to like not have the same professor. I did have that professor again for other classes, but it helped to have someone different for physics just because I had like already tied like that disappointment and frustration.
Yeah, to like you were basically looking for a clean slate. Like
exactly.
Like, I want a clean slate.
I just want a clean slate with physics. I don't want anything. Yeah. And I mean, it didn't help like at my orientation, I knew I was going to take physics 1 because I was advanced in my classes for high school. And my professor, like the new professor that was going to be teaching the class, met me and was like, don't bother taking my class, like you're going to fail. And I was like, cool, man.
I honestly, let me be honest with you, I cannot understand how people can say that to others and they don't understand the impact that their words have. I just like, I'm so fortunate that I've never encountered those words of discouragement or somebody like looking down on me, or I don't know, maybe I'm being stared down, but maybe I just didn't notice it or realize it. But yeah, it's just one of those things that I understand that I'm also so fortunate when it comes to like no one telling me, oh, you can't do this or you don't fit in. So that's why when I hear this, that's why I was surprised when I hear this, like in your case, this happened to you. Like it just baffles me that people have that audacity to tell others, like, if you don't want to do it, if you think you can't do it, well, that's your problem. Like, don't go around discouraging people because the words that you tell others do have power, and they have more power than you think. And yes. I'm trying to understand, wrap my head around what goes to those people's minds. It's like, I'm just going to tell this person, like, you can't do it, man. It just makes no sense. Like, stop.
I know. I will say I've seen that, like, I had, being an advisor of Society of Women Engineers, I had a lot of students, and like, I was, like a faculty ally of out in STEM also. And like, so being a part of those organizations and being around those organizations, I had students that would tell me these like horror stories of like what was happening with their professors also. And it was just like so discouraging sometimes, and disheartening, like the things that some of the other professors would say, or like some of the things I've heard professors say to me. Like, I remember on an exam, like, this is so petty, but I'll never forget it. On an exam I took my sophomore year, I had the second highest grade out of all of the cohort. And it was like, I think I missed 1 point, but there was like 2 points extra credit. So I ended up like, I think it was like just over 100%, but there was one person who did better than me. So I killed it on that exam, right? Yeah. Like I studied my butt off. Like, I did so well on that exam. And then I get my test back, and you would think like, like, awesome job, like something, they don't have to say that, but it'd be kind of nice. I get my exam back, and the only thing it says on there is, your handwriting is kind of high schoolish.
This was college.
This was college. My sophomore year of college in engineering. That is the only thing that my professor had to say about when I aced this exam, that I studied my butt off. And he was like going on and on about how this is one of the hardest tests you'll ever take in this class, like in any of these classes. And I freaking got over 100%, or like right under, like I was top of the class. And he says, your handwriting is kind of high schoolish.
Oh, Jesus.
You know what I mean? And I was like, I know that at the time, I had very bubbly, girly handwriting. I eventually learned to write more chicken scratch so I could stop getting called like girly handwriting.
But it's crazy, because who cares about your handwriting? If you can communicate and you get the damn thing right, and then you pass the test, like what?
Like, I know. And for me, like, I feel like sometimes it's like, what is that in somebody else that they feel the need to highlight some like shortcoming that's not even a shortcoming, something that they feel like that they don't like, and
it's not even relevant.
It's not relevant. And it's like, that's the kind of stupid stuff that people are doing that are pushing women out of engineering. It's like, what what the hell was the point of that?
Jeez.
And like, and I've seen people do that in industry too, where it's just like, you know, for me, like one of the reasons I went to grad school over industry was I saw that like in education and like research, I had more opportunity to grow and learn and keep going on and beyond. And like, I felt like it was a more collaborative environment, like where I could be taken more seriously, hopefully. And in industry, I had to get very good at manipulating people because the only way that I could ever get my idea to be heard was if I could manipulate another man in the room to think it was his idea. And it pissed me off. I was like, I am sick and tired of working my butt off to try to convince someone else that like an idea is their own so my ideas can be heard. And I would maybe kind of curious if your friends have like a similar thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to have maybe we should have a group chat and
Oh my
like
God,
just
that'd be
have
amazing.
like a multiple Zoom. Like,
Yeah,
just like, yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah, because I mean, as a dude, I mean, I don't what would you say? Like,
But I mean, you come from like another country, like wasn't there? I am sure, like I've heard from a lot of my international students that there was like a lot of different barriers that came with that at a university, and like,
to be honest, I'm gonna be completely honest.
yeah,
I mean, I had obstacles when it comes to, yeah, it's competitive and I had to like apply a ton
yeah,
but my experience has been absolutely amazing. I am so grateful
good.
that I've landed jobs and opportunities with people that were great around me, both like males and females, all like types of different races,
Yeah,
very diverse groups. Companies, the company that I work for now, it's a really good company. I've been I'm in this company for about the last 3 years. So if I had if what would you say, if I ever had any obstacles, or they were just competition related when it comes to the school, and but after
yeah,
that, after you develop your network, and I mean, it just becomes a lot easier to get opportunities, and you get pulled. Like for the company that I work now, somebody asked me, hey, do you want to work for us? I have this position and I like the way it works, so you just want to come on.
yeah.
So it was really easy. So what would you say?
I do want to say though, along the whole way, I have always had really incredible mentors and people who've lifted
Yeah.
me up. And like, I think that's a huge part. Like, again, that community is so important for success because when those
Right.
barriers come, like, it's like you always have someone who you know has your back.
Mm-hmm. No, that is true. And then the last thing I wanted to add when it comes to my experience, like, but I'm not blind to the fact that it's not like that for other engineers. You know, it's not like that. Like, I mean, for example, your case, like you're telling me your story. I know that it's not the same for other people that come from different schools, maybe different other parts of the country. So not everybody has the same journey.
Yeah.
And I mean, I worked with a couple of years ago. I was working with three female electrical engineers that were running a design, and I was representing the customer. So I was quote unquote the project manager. Well, actually, I was the project manager. So I was working with them, and then I was working with their mentor from the company they were working for. It was a senior engineer. So I was just so lucky that I got to work with them because they were also so. When it comes to electrical engineering, when I was in school, I was dumb. Like I was just like, wow, electrical engineer really.
We're there to learn.
Yeah. No. But like electrical engineer was one of the things that really like kicked my butt.
Yeah.
But then after I went on to industry and started like managing this project that was all pure electrical engineering, it wasn't so bad because the people that I ran into, they were very patient with me. They were all really cool. And like, so it was almost like this other guy, the senior electrical engineer who was teaching everyone. I felt like part of the group that he was just very patient and this is what it does. And then it started like a lot of memories started coming back from the school. And I was like, oh, okay, now it makes a lot of sense. You know?
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, so it's good to get these insights. And I think it's good to share those stories so that people understand that the obstacles that different people overcome and it's important to share those, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, you know, like, it's important that we keep moving forward, because again, like, you look at the hurdles that other women have faced like a long time ago in engineering and STEM and all these things, and it's like our obstacles that we're facing now are like nothing compared to those, you know. But it's like, if we don't keep facing them, like, those obstacles don't get smaller, like those obstacles are going to maintain the way they are. And it's like, we have to just keep pushing through and like, you know, have like, trust the process, and, you know, just raise awareness, and again, like, support, like, you know, everyone's supporting each other. And it's like, who knows, like, maybe like some professor someday hears like, oh my God, like, I never thought about the fact that I would have commented on one of my students handwriting, like, that would make that, like, that would hurt their feelings, or that would feel weird. Like, you know, maybe they hear that and they learn something new. Or like, I know I've heard from other students of like their professors commenting on when they cut their hair or change their clothes. And it's like, and it makes you feel uncomfortable, because you're like, it further highlights like that you're a woman in a way that you like maybe don't want that attention in your class. And like, maybe those engineering professors never thought about that. And it's like, maybe hearing that story like will make a difference.
Right.
Maybe at least another girl can be like, hey, I'm not alone, and like, we're gonna do this together, and like, hopefully we can like keep making a difference. And who cares, like, let's make an impact on society, and let's be engineers, and let's enjoy it.
I love that. Nice. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think also what it has to do, it's like like you say, awareness and perspective, you know, it's like those are huge when it comes to like what people say, like how they treat their students. Like, maybe a professor is also, who knows, maybe the professor is insecure, because like you were saying, they're also human. Right. So they have insecurities, and then maybe they feel threatened by a student, or maybe they just don't like each other. It's just kind of odd. So they feel they have the need to crush the soul of another person. They're like, yo, I'm just trying to like come up, learn here, like get into industry. Like, there's no place for discouragement on, it's one of those things. Like, I think encouragement can go so far for somebody. A lot of the times, I think we disregard that a little bit of a push and a little bit of encouragement can take somebody very, very far, and a lot of people don't realize that. Yeah, absolutely. But it's, what a wonderful conversation. I think it's a great insight from your perspective, your experience. I was very, very glad that I invited you onto the channel so you share your experience. So is there any closing thoughts that you want to share? I feel like we've already like covered a ton of stuff, and thank you so much for having me on here. And it's been a lot of fun and very insightful, and it's, you know, it's also very encouraging just like have these conversations, because like, these are conversations that we need to keep having. And again, hopefully we can help support someone else who's like had similar experiences or going through that now, and like, no, like, don't worry, like, maybe hopefully your next professor will be the one that like highlights everything you says and is like, you're incredible and you can do this. And not only that, but I think it's also important to understand that if you went through it and something happened to you, then at least somebody is aware, and they can expect something that may happen to them in the future. But not only can they expect that obstacle, but also they can expect to overcome it. You know, it's like, okay, well, I know Kelsey went through it. Dr. Joy, she went on, she was told she didn't fit in, but she went and got her PhD. Now she's killing it. So I'll be okay. You know, so it's just one of those things that, no, but a great insight. And thank you very much for coming on.